Okay, I think that's us now. Can you hear me? Well, it's lovely to see you all. A couple of housekeeping items just to begin. Those of you who are parking in the garage, you will take your little parking ticket and put it in the machine at the end. But before you leave here at the end of the session where we're having the reception next door, you will get a second parking ticket that you will also need. So the one you have in your pocket, put it in the machine before you go to your car. Put the second parking ticket that you get from next door into the machine, and it will spit another little thing back out to you. And that's the one you use to leave the garage, okay, at the special reduction. Much more importantly, we have wonderful speakers at the conference, and we have a book display at the back with their books. And have a look at them if you want to purchase them. We've got the bookstore individual agent is with us here, and also at the bookstore tomorrow there's another display. So thank you all for coming out. It's a beautiful evening to have this wonderful conference, the Integrity of Creation Conference. This is our second annual endowed presidential conference, and the title is Protecting Our Common Home, Science and Religion. And to begin, I'm going to ask Father Ray French, our Vice President for Mission, to have the invocation.
Sorry, another Scots guy. Let us pray. All-powerful God, you are present in the whole universe and in the smallest of your creatures. You embrace with your tenderness all that exists. Pour out upon us the power of your love, that we may protect life and beauty. Fill us with peace, that we may live as brothers and sisters, harming no one. O God of the poor, help us to rescue the abandoned and forgotten of this earth, so precious in your eyes. Bring healing to our lives, that we may protect the world and not prey on it, that we may sow beauty, not pollution and destruction. Touch the hearts of those who look only for gain at the expense of the poor and the earth. Teach us to discover the worth of each thing, to be filled with awe and contemplation, to recognize that we are profoundly united with every creature as we journey towards your infinite light. We thank you for being with us each day. Encourage us, we pray, in our struggle for justice and for love and for peace. We pray through the Spirit who gives life. Amen.
It's wonderful to see so many of you here. Welcome our students and our faculty, our university community. Welcome our regional and local community to this. And welcome also our global community. The presentations are being delivered by people from across the United States and indeed across the world. We've got wonderful speakers, and we are live streaming globally to the Spiritan communities and other communities across the globe. So it's nice to say hello globally to everyone to the conference. I am, by the way, Professor McGill, and I'm the conference convener, and you'll be seeing me dotting up and down, introducing as we go through the next day or so. So let me now introduce the President of Duquesne University, President Ken Gormley.
Thank you very much, and good evening. Welcome to Duquesne University of the Holy Spirit for the second annual Integrity of Creation Conference. My thanks to Dr. Jerry McGill and all of the organizers of this fabulous gathering, as well as to our distinguished speakers. And I'd like to note that I learned at dinner tonight's distinguished speaker, Dr. Ursula Goodenough, was trained and earned degrees at Columbia and Harvard, has taught around the world, but her mother grew up in Turtle Creek. So ladies and gentlemen, it all comes back to Pittsburgh and Duquesne. This presidential conference was commissioned by former President Charlie Doherty to celebrate the spirit and mission of our special institution. The conference occurs annually as part of an endowed series to provide a scholarly forum to explore topics related to the general theme of integrity of creation. And I'm pleased to announce, as Jerry noted, that tonight we will be joined through live streaming by Spiritan communities around the world, a fabulous new advancement. I'm honored to have been asked to say a few words to kick this off for this opening forum that's entitled Protecting Our Common Home, Scientific Contributions and Religious Perspectives. The title of this conference is taken from Pope Francis's now famous encyclical, Laudato Si, Praise Be to You, issued in May of 2015. In this, Pope Francis says that his aim is to enter into dialogue with all people about our common home and our shared inheritance. The theme of integrity of creation, with all of its different topics, including climate change, which was the subject of the conference in 2015, was chosen as a focus of academic research and scholarship because of its profoundly Spiritan roots. This congregation, as you know, founded Duquesne University of the Holy Spirit in 1878, and these priests who came here were dedicated to the service of the poorest and most marginalized, and they came here to provide educational opportunities specifically to families working in the steel mills and the factories here. And their charism, the very heartbeat of their religious family, resounds today in the living body of this great university that we have. The founder of the Spiritans, Claude Desplaces, and students here are familiar with Desplaces Hall, Claude Desplaces, along with another significant figure in Spiritan history, Francis Lieberman, enjoined followers to serve the poor as a priority of their ministry and mission. So they were originally known as the Holy Ghost Fathers, and were charged by Lieberman to become the advocates, the supporters, the defenders of the weak and the little ones against all who oppress them. This clear and direct instruction would be translated over the course of 3 centuries of Spiritan history into specific emphases and agendas of action. And the Spiritans, if any of you know them, are all about action. Foremost among them was the need to educate the young, and hence the reason for Duquesne University's creation 138 years ago. Over the course of the past 30 years, another Spiritan emphasis or impulse to respond to the needs of current times focused on the integrity of creation as a crying need of this age that we live in. The relationship you should recognize between serving the poor and preserving and respecting the planet was a very clear one for the Spiritans. And it's that very relationship that Pope Francis outlines both strongly and urgently in this encyclical Laudato Si, where he states there is an intimate relationship between the poor and the fragility of the planet and the conviction that everything in the world is connected. So embracing the spirit of an earlier document, Gaudium et Spes, from Vatican Council II, Pope Francis calls for a deeper understanding of the life of God in the world and the laws of social life. And this includes the notion of a common good and the general welfare of the entire human family. So our common home, the Holy Father states, is threatened by global environmental deterioration, which in turn is linked to consumerism and wasteful consumption, or what he calls ethical degradation, which I think is a great term. Pope Francis calls for a shift to a radically different approach that assures respect for the environment through authentic human ecology and an authentic humanity. At its core, this is a vision of the world based upon a recognition of the whole world as God's creation, as a gift of his love. Drawing upon the works of his namesake, St. Francis of Assisi, Pope Francis calls this shared home of ours, quote, our sister, Mother Earth, who sustains and guides us, but whom we've harmed and abused irresponsibly oftentimes. The antidote, he says, is an integral society. And this is the very important part, I think, of what Pope Francis is trying to convey. It's a vision of an environment that sees connectedness in and among all things. So for Pope Francis, there are not two separate crises, one environmental and the other social. Rather, there is one very complex and dangerous crisis that can only be addressed by a vision based upon the principle of concern for the common good, environmental ecology, social ecology, economic ecology, and human ecology, with a particular concern, of course, for the poorest and most vulnerable. Just this month, in his message for the World Day of Prayer for the Care of Creation on September 1st of this year, Pope Francis reaffirmed the need for an integral ecology in Christian life. In his proposal to add the care and protection of creation to the traditional list of corporal and spiritual works of mercy that we all learned in catechism when we were young, the Holy Father says that care for creation requires, as a spiritual matter, a grateful contemplation of God's world. But additionally, as a corporal matter, it calls for simple daily gestures that break with the logic of violence, exploitation, and selfishness. In other words, Pope Francis is saying that personal acts of kindness and selflessness, of discipline, including personal decisions to care for the earth, such as refusing to waste water or food or energy, recycling, avoiding wanton consumerism, all of these things can constitute a new form of the corporal works of mercy. Such acts make visible virtue to the whole world for others to see. And in that recent message, titled Show Mercy to Our Common Home, Pope Francis goes on to say that concern for the planet's future unites religious leaders and organizations of all faiths and draws attention to the moral and spiritual crisis that is at the heart of the current environmental problems. So he writes, as an integral ecology emphasizes, human beings are deeply connected with all of creation. When we mistreat nature, we also mistreat human beings. A very powerful, I think, message. Ultimately, Pope Francis calls us to conversion, ecological, social, and spiritual. He's talking about a conversion of heart, mind, and action that will result in changed laws, changed patterns of daily life for all of us. So I hope that this conference will inspire us to deeper reflection, to scholarship, and to action for change, leading to true conversion to our common responsibility to preserve and treasure what Pope Francis calls our common home. And I hope that it will allow us to bring into sharper focus and adapt our thinking and our own lives so that we can address the unprecedented challenges of modern times consistent with our rich and historical Spiritan roots, the very roots that built this great Catholic Spiritan university and now carry us into a bold new era. So thank you all and best wishes for a fabulous conference.
Thank you, President Gormley, for such a delightful call to work. What a lovely challenge. It's my pleasure now to introduce Alan Seidler, who's not only a spectacular scientist, but he's also in charge of our research office.
Thank you, Jerry. I have the delightful opportunity and privilege of introducing our keynote speaker, Professor Ursula Goodenough. She is the Professor of Biology in the Department of Biology at Washington University and also an Associate Professor of Anatomy in the Washington University School of Medicine, both in St. Louis. She has a distinguished career and a most appropriate research interest. She works on the molecular genetic specification of the sexual traits of Chlamydomonas. And for those of you who are not scientists, it is not this frowning fellow over here. It's actually a green algae. And importantly, particularly important to our work here, Chlamydomonas, some of her work is focused on exploring the formation of lipid bodies, which, as some of you may know, can serve as a source of biofuel. So an alternative fuel source. Very fitting for a conference of this direction. She she actually worked her education through Radcliffe College and Barnard College, Columbia University for a master's, culminating in her doctorate work and her award of a PhD from Harvard University, where she was also on the faculty following her graduation, culminating in an associate professor of biology at Harvard. She has over 140 papers, if I count them correctly, papers and articles, and numerous book chapters to go with it. So this is a very distinguished academic career. But Dr. Goodenough has been more than just an academic scientist. She has been involved in science policy with the FASIB Subcommittee on Ethical Issues of Genetic Research, part of public outreach with her presidency of the Institute for Religion in an Age of Science, again very appropriate for this conference, and has some particular honors. She is a fellow of the American Women in Science, she is a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and she is a fellow of the American Academy of Microbiology. She is also not just an academician and had an academic career, but also raised, in addition to all her academic achievements, 5 children, and is now grandmother to 8 grandchildren. So quite a set of accomplishments. I know you don't want to listen to me anymore. You'd rather listen to Dr. Goodenough. So with no further delay, I would like to have you, all of us, welcome Dr. Goodenough to talk about the evolutionary dimensions of Laudato Si.
Take the time, Ursula. There's plenty of time.
Okay. Hi. So first of all, can the lights go down again? Somebody amped the lights.
We're having issues with the light.
You're having issues with the lights?
Yeah, with the light down low. Can't see you up there.
I don't care whether you can see me or not. I want to see. Yeah, much better. So the other issue is that we have these 2 screens, which is obviously necessary for the shape of the room, but I have one pointer, and I have a lectern in between me and that screen. So I'm going to try to talk without using the pointer, which those of you who are academics know is kind of hard. You want to point to it. But I'll try not to do that. When I have to point, I'll try to remember to do it on both screens, and we'll wing it. So with all of that, hi, I'm honored to be here. I have enjoyed so much my interactions so far and can't wait for the rest of the conference. One of the things that happened when I got this invitation was I did go ahead and read the Laudato Si, which I had heard about but had not taken the time to read. It's a wonderful document. It's not very long. All of you should download it and read it because there's so much in it for everyone. The title of this conference is Science and Religion Relating to the Integrity of Creation, and I'm the science wonk, and so I realized that what I really wanted to talk about is my favorite subject, which is evolution. And in the Laudato Si, if you read it, what you will find is that these 6 words, everything is interconnected, everything is interrelated, comes up again and again and again throughout this encyclical. And the notion of interrelatedness and interconnectedness in the biological sciences, and in fact in all the historical sciences, geology, cosmology, and so on, has two meanings. One is the present tense meaning of all the critters that are here and the rocks and the streams and the atmosphere now. Our interrelationships, our interdependency, it's an ecological concept. And most of what is going to be happening, as I understand it, in the rest of this conference is going to be focusing on the present, on our common home now. But there is a second meaning for interrelatedness and interconnectedness, which is evolutionary. And that's a past tense thing. It's how we got to 2016. And it's a very long story and a very beautiful one, and one that I am honored to have, or I have elected to tell you about tonight. So going through the encyclical, Pope Francis doesn't focus on evolution, but he has it in there. And what he has in there, these are the three places that I liked. First is, we live and act on the basis of a reality which has previously been given to us, which precedes our existence and our abilities. He writes, a good part of our genetic code is shared by many living beings. Well, he didn't take my biology class. It's all living beings. All living beings share many, many genes, many instructions for making enzymes, for copying DNA, for making membranes, and so on. About 50% of all of the genes in all of the organisms on the planet today have a sort of a toolkit, and then the rest of the genes are involved in the specialized parts that distinguish one creature from the next. And then he talks about the speed with which human activity has developed contrasts with the naturally slow pace of biological evolution. And this slow pace is something that we're going to be thinking about this evening as well. So we're going to immerse ourselves in the evolutionary story, keeping in mind these three beautiful sentences from Pope Francis. I'm first going to talk about this very idea of our common ancestry and really how to think about that, because it's not necessarily, I've discovered, intuitive as to what that really means. And we're then going to look at the evolutionary story, but we're going to do it in a different way. We're going to walk back through time rather than the usual way of starting with something simple and getting it bigger. You'll see what I mean. And after that, a very quick walk back through the history of the whole universe. And what I hope you'll take away from this, and that it will sort of underlie all the conversations we have about the present day, is that this understanding of our evolutionary relationship, interrelatedness, deepens, I would say, our commitment to ecological imperatives that we now face. That by understanding how we got here has a very meaningful parameters for what we should do now that we're here. So let's do this common ancestry first. And most of you are familiar with this. Even in high school, you probably had to do a genealogy of your family or something like that. So this is me and my Turtle Creek mother on the left. And on the right is my mother with her Turtle Creek mother, my grandmother. So we're all familiar with genealogy at that level. And this common ancestor thing is something that we see when we look at a little chart like this. What we have is A and B, who have two children, C and D, And they have, in turn, children EF in one family and GH in the other. So F and G, if we just look at those two, they're cousins. And their most recent common ancestor, this is the concept that we're going to be working with tonight, is their grandparents, A and B. So D is not an ancestor to F, and C is not a common ancestor to C. You have to go back to the A-B group. With me? Okay. All right. As you know, you can do genealogies online these days, and maybe some of you have done them. So Julie does her family tree, and she discovers she has an ancestor named Martha Kirk from the 18th century. And meanwhile, over in Vienna, Franz is doing his family tree, and he discovers that Martha Kirk is also in his lineage. So Martha is Julie and Franz's most recent common ancestor. Okay, so now we have a bunch of generations. And here's a fun one, which is George Bush and Barack Obama. So somebody did this for them, and it turns out that there's a Samuel Hinckley in 1662 who is the most recent common ancestor of George Bush and Barack Obama. So we're okay so far. We're thinking about hundreds of years at most. We can think that way. And it gets, though, more interesting when we ask, well, what about all the humans that are alive today? What if they could all do their family trees? And Richard Dawkins' little quip I couldn't resist. One thing is certain, all of your ancestors were fertile. Okay, so everyone on the planet living today does their family tree. There's data for everything. And we have to think about where the humans are who are doing this and how they got here. So this is the A map. There are lots of them coming out. There's still lots of people fussing about this. But it's pretty clear that about 80,000 years or so ago, people began migrating out of Africa. These are regular old Homo sapiens people, and went to all different parts of the globe and also came back again. So we have people now all over the place where they all sort of started out from Africa. So now we're going to do this. This comes from Richard Dawkins. And so you see on the top there, it's Europe and Africa and Asia and so on. And at the top is present. And then we're going back in millions of years. Millions of years ago is MYA. And MYA then is, I suppose I could use this since, I could use my pointer and, yeah, but then it doesn't even work over here. Anybody who wants to see the pointer, you can move, or I'll try not to use it. All right. So we have all of these people, and they're all doing their family tree. And Dawkins just did a back-of-the-envelope calculation about when it would be that they would find the most recent common ancestor of all the humans on the earth today. And so it's circled here. It's about 30,000 years ago. So humans have been here for 160,000 years ago anyway. So this is not the first human. This is not the fittest human. It's none of the above. It's just that that's the one that everybody happens to be related to. Okay, so with that much, we're going to continue this exercise that we just did with the humans, and we're now going to do all the critters. We're going to walk back through evolutionary time. These slides, and in fact Richard sent me the actual figures from his book, is from a wonderful book called The Ancestor's Tale that I'm sure Barnes & Nobles would be happy to get for you. And what Dawkins does is he has this walk that he sort of modeled on the Canterbury Tales, where he has rules of the game. So we have 4 rules that I'm now going to tell you about. Here are the rules of our walk. We're starting out with all the humans alive today, and we all walk back through time together as a group. All 3.8 billion of us are walking back through time. So you got to start getting your sci-fi thinking going here. We're joined in our walk by present-day organisms only. So extinct organisms by definition can't walk with us, so we're not going to see any dinosaurs walking with us. It's just going to be organisms that are alive today. And we do this 28 times, so 28 groups are going to be walking back. And what we're going to do is meet up with them, and we do this rendezvous at the time that our most recent common ancestor was alive, as assessed sometimes by fossil record, but almost all of this is determined by analysis of DNA, of genomes, where you can now very, very accurately figure out ancestry and relationships, just as you can with birth and death records from a town hall. So let's just do a few of them, and then I'll stop and make sure you're all getting it. So over on the right in each one of these screens is going to be the walk. And I know it's ugly and gray and you can't read it, but this is what Dawkins did in his book too. It's ugly and gray and you can't read it. So on the very right-hand side is us humans. And we're walking back through time, down toward the bottom of the screen. And at 6 million years, there's a gray circle, and that's where we join the first group that's also walking back through time. These are the chimpanzees and the bonobos. They join us at 6 million years ago. That's when our common ancestor was alive, 6 million years ago. And you'll notice that the chimp line, in fact, has a fork up around 2 million years ago. So that's the common ancestor of these 2 kinds of chimps that are with us today, the chimps and the bonobos. They diverged 2 million years ago, and so there's a fork in their tree. Okay, we humans keep going, and the next group we meet are the gorillas at 7 million years ago. That's when our common ancestor with the gorilla was alive, was 7 million years ago. 14 million years ago, we hit a bunch of orangs. And I might point out, of course, tragically, I would say that we 8 billion humans are being joined by, 3,000 chimps or whatever it is. This is not a symmetric group at this point. 18 million years, we're joined by the gibbons. That's when we have a common ancestor. And again, this gibbon tree has branched, so the common ancestor of all gibbons was at 10 million years ago. 25 million years ago, we get the old world monkeys, the macaques, the baboons, the langurs, the colobus monkeys. Okay, how are you doing? Okay? Any questions? All right. See what's happening here. Okay, so there's another thing that's going on at the same time, and that is that our beautiful planet Earth is also evolving. It's doing this by plate tectonics. These masses, land masses, move along. The rate of movement of the continents is the rate that a fingernail grows. Okay, just to give you a sense of this. So at the top is what our planet looks like now with the various plates. 25 million years ago, it's only subtly different, but if you look closely, you'll see that in fact South America and Africa are closer together than they are now. And at 40 million years ago, which is our next time point, I couldn't find a 40 million year planet, but Africa and South America are even closer, and apparently they're close enough that monkeys could hop, skip, and jump on logs or whatever and go over to South America. So at 40 million years ago, we joined next the New World monkeys, the tamarins, the marmosets, the howler monkeys that evolved independently in South America. 63 million years ago, the lemurs, wonderful critters that only live on Madagascar. Our common ancestor with the lemur is 63 million years ago. Okay, we're coming up to an event. I'm just going to see. Anybody remember what happened 65 million years ago? I shouldn't have asked you. I should have asked other people. But anyway, yes. 65 million years ago, we have a very important event. An asteroid collides with the Earth and covers things with dust. The dinosaurs get done in, and that's a mark in our planet story that I'm going to indicate from now on. See that arrow right in the middle? That's pointing to 65 million years ago, and you will sort of have that as a marker as we go back. Okay, 75 million years ago, we start to see the first really big group. Okay, we are now getting all the rodents and all the rabbits. And as you can see, they have, since that common ancestor that we had with rodents and rabbits, they have diversified into numerous kinds of critters that I didn't even begin to try to list. 85 million years ago, we have the Lawrenciatheres joining us, and that's a really cool group. That's cats, dogs, bears, weasels, hyenas, seals, walruses, horses, camels, bats, shrews, all sorts of kinds of animals that we don't think of as even having anything to do with each other, but their common ancestor and our common ancestor was around on the planet 85 million years ago. Then we get the xenarthrans, which means strange joints, armadillo, sloth, and anteater. Those are also South American, and if we now have a look at what the plates are doing, you can see that South America and Africa are just about touching, and so no big deal to cross over into South America from Africa. And then the Africana, so-called themselves, at 105 million years ago, elephant, shrew, elephants themselves, the manatees, and so on. And then 140, we get the marsupials, which of course are known to be in Australia, but as you can see at this point, all the continents are completely mushed together into something called Gondwana, and so Australia, whatever, that doesn't mean anything anymore. Or Australia starts to become something more meaningful later in time. Okay, so when I've told this story, when I get to this point, some people say, oh, so did that common ancestor have a pouch? That's what we want to do, right? We want to have the common ancestor have something to do with what evolved from that common ancestor. But so here we are 140 million years ago. This is a picture of what's called a basal mammal, the kind of mammals that were around at about the same time, 200 million years ago. And those dudes were tiny. Paperclip, okay? little tiny guys. So these common ancestors that we're meeting are probably going to be very, very small mammals, which through time then can evolve into being elephants or giraffes or humans. Now we have a big gap. Our human line on the very right, if you could see it, has these little blue dots. That's all of the rendezvous that we've had so far. And now we have a big gap to the, after the marsupials, to the reptiles. At this point, the planet is completely ridiculous. And the reptiles, of course, also including the birds. 340, we get the amphibians. And then we get two kinds of fish. These coelacanths actually have more structures similar to the mammals and the amphibians than do the next group. And they are getting quite ancient, 425 million years ago. And here are what we usually think of as fish, the ray-finned fish at 440, that have obviously diversified into many, many lineages. Can't live without the sharks, to 460 million years ago. And look at the planet at this point. It's, yeah. And even more so now. The ambulochracids join. They are starfish, sea urchins, sand dollars, sea cucumbers. And then we get completely overwhelmed, all right, the protostomes. Worms of all sorts, and mollusks, crustaceans, insects, centipedes, spiders. They're all buzzing around us vertebrate animals stumbling along back in time at about 580 million years ago. Now another big gap to 700 million years ago where we get the anemones, the corals, the jellyfish. And this is actually the last image that I have found of the Earth, because after this time, about 750 million years ago, all of the records that the geologists used to figure out where the plates are have been erased. So we just have to assume that this keeps happening, but, and that it will always look weird compared to what it's like now. At this point, we have sponges joining us. And then we now come to the first single-celled organism. So all of the organisms we've seen so far have this habit of many cells coming together to form a single critter. Here are the choanoflagellates. So the choanoflagellates, 900 million years ago, we share common ancestry with this very beautiful single-celled organism. Fungi, again, the first fungi were almost certainly single-celled. The guys at the top are the yeast that we use for bread and for beer. But the fungi, with time, evolved so that they now also have multicellular versions of themselves in what we call the mushrooms. So let me start again, and no smart alecky faculty members. Who are we missing? Who haven't we seen yet? Yes. Very good. And I messed up. There's actually one before, the amoebae. That wouldn't have occurred to you, but yes. The next are the plants. So they started at this point, as you can see, if you're looking at the timeline on the left-hand side of our gray diagrams, Dawkins has long since given up, putting dates because we're now talking about estimates. But the first plants were definitely single-celled. In fact, that's a picture of Chlamydomonas, the guy that I study. And once again, they evolved with time in one lineage to form the land plants, but these algae are still around as single cells, just as there are still single-celled fungi. And then, just because it gets messy and Dawkins kind of gave up at this point, other eukaryotic groups, we'll see them later. We are eukaryotes. Brown algae, diatoms, ciliates, and everything, they're all showing up, so deep that nobody's even talking about how long ago it was. But at least 2,000 million years ago, i.e. 2 billion years ago, we have our common ancestry with the last two groups. One are archaeans, which have only been known to exist. They were thought to be bacteria, but now they're a whole separate group, and that was only discovered in the 1970s. And then the bacteria themselves, which you certainly know something about from strep throat or whatever your bacterial experiences have been. These are very, very deep, and the last ones that will join us. The bacteria are so numerous on our planet that in a spade full of soil from your garden, there are as many bacteria as there are humans on the planet. And the bacteria are so important to us that if all bacteria were wiped out tomorrow, life on Earth would grind to a halt in about 6 months. They rule. Okay, so that's our walk. And now my last few slides are going to be looking at these relationships in different ways. Now that we have our walk, let's do it as you'd find it usually in a textbook. So textbooks these days have these 3 bubbles in them. They have the archaea and the bacteria as 2 completely different kingdoms. And then the third are these eukaryotes, which include us. So thinking about common ancestry and thinking about how all of these lines and everything work, we can put a red asterisk right there in the center. And we can say that right in there somewhere is the common ancestor to all of life today. Right? They all come together at that focus. If we go up to these eukaryotes, they're the ones that we were mostly following on our walk. And in fact, we can then do the same thing. We can say there's a common ancestor to all of these eukaryotes. The dudes on the right-hand side of the bubble are those other eukaryotes that I sort of skimmed over, but include lots of different kinds of seaweeds and stuff that are very cool, but we can just nod to them and move on. So there's the common ancestor of all eukaryotic life. And where are we? Does anybody even see where we are in here? Yeah. So the walk that we just took went along the animal route until we met that choana flagellate. That was that first single cell, the really pretty looking thing that looked like a cupcake. Then we were joined by the fungi. Then we got some plants. And we got back to that middle common ancestor, right, with the bacteria and the eukarya kind of coming in here with all the others. But it's unbelievably, to me, beautiful. So this is one way of doing it, and I have no idea whether the projector is going to be able to, oh good, okay, not so bad. This came out about a year ago. Some graduate students put it together and it went online and everybody's having a great time with it. So in the upper left, which you can't read at all and you're not supposed to, is a great big tree of life. Down at 5 o'clock are the archaea and the bacteria, which they intentionally didn't pay much attention to. They sort of squunched them in there. And then all the rest of them are eukaryotes. So at 7 o'clock it's fungi, then up at the top it's animals, then plants, okay? And these are just relationships, the same kind of thing that we've been doing. And then what we're going to do is blow them up. So in the top right, we can now begin to read it. It says animals, and then you can just barely read, you are here. Okay. Go to the lower left. They've blown it up again. Animals, you are here. And the fourth one on the right, you are here. The animals around us, some of them I knew, some of them I had to cheat. They're amphibians, they're birds. Because these things are so deep, they all show up in the same place in this diagram. Again, amazing. So let's go back to extinction. All of the ones that were walking with us are the ones that are alive today. But what about, how do we think about extinction? So over here in the left panel, somebody just sort of made up a tree, and then maybe you can see it. I'll actually go ahead and use my pointer. Yeah, my pointer decided not to work. Okay, not tempted. But you should be able to see, right, it's sort of in the middle, there's a red line that goes out to the end and another red line that goes out there. Those are two lineages that have made it to the present day. And all these other ones have gone extinct. And this is based on the calculations that it's possible to make of how often extinction happens and how most organisms get left behind. Not their genes, not their lineages, it's still going on. But that particular kind of fly doesn't exist, or that particular kind of plant. The right also gives us another very important thing to keep in mind in all of this, which is our limited understanding of our fellow beings. So somebody has diagrammed all life that ever existed on the top. And then of that, just one square of the total is all life that's present today. So that's another way of talking about how much extinction there has been. And then the purple rectangle on the right is all life that has been identified. And here's our three little groups. Most of the life that's on the planet has not yet even been identified in terms of bringing it into the lab, saying this is what it is, here's its genome, here's what we think it is. And most of those unknowns, it may not surprise you, are bacteria. So this just came out a few months ago, and it just knocks me out. So our eukaryotes are green going off to the left. That's how much diversity there is in our eukaryotes. I'm sorry, going off to the right. The archaea, these new guys, have a little bit more diversity going down to the base. And here is the diversity in the bacterial realm. They're everywhere. There's no place on the planet that doesn't have all sorts of cool bacteria. And what people are doing now is they're taking samples of just gook, let's say, from the bottom of the ocean floor. And there's a technique now called megagenomics, where you can just get all the DNA from that sample and sequence it all, and then you can figure out which goes with which, and you can actually reconstruct organisms. Even though you've never seen them, you can't culture them in the lab. And all of these guys in purple over on the right were found just in ocean floor samples, completely new to scientific understanding until now. Okay, we're almost there. I want to have you think about how this all happened. Here's our common ancestor to all of modern life, the red asterisk in our three-way bubble, giving rise to bacteria, eukaryotes, and archaea, living around 3 billion years ago. And this guy has many, many of the genes, maybe 50% of the genes that one finds in modern organisms of these bacteria, eukaryotes, and archaea. But this was for sure not the first organism. It was really complicated. Even those 50% of those genes are very complicated. So everyone figures that there was some sort of first life form that then evolved until it got to the point of being this first common ancestor that then radiated to give everything that we have today. This first life form may not have used DNA at all. It may have kept itself going in some completely different way. We haven't a clue. And then, of course, the theological moment of getting life from non-life, and nobody has any idea, and probably no one ever will, as to what happened. But people are mucking around in ocean floors because the favorite place for the geologists and evolutionists now to think of where life may have originated from non-life is in these deep sea vents where it gets very hot and very cool. It's a very good place for chemistry to happen. Lots of rich minerals down there. Good place to be hunting around. Four slides about the history of our universe. So we start with this spectacular place that we live in, dated very precisely to 4.567 billion years ago. So it took a while for the thing to cool and get life going. So our Earth, our Sun, our whole solar system was the sort of recycled version of a supernova that happened in the past. A supernova happens when a star gets to the end of its life and it explodes, and during that explosion, all of the elements of the periodic table that you may remember hanging in your chemistry lab on the wall, all of those elements are made in these stars, these exploding supernovae. At the beginning, there were only two kinds of elements, mostly hydrogen, a little bit of helium. So because of this explosion and then a recondensation, we get a second generation star, our star, the sun, and the planets that go around it. This is a picture of Andromeda, which is kind of a twin galaxy to our Milky Way. So we can't, of course, take a picture of the Milky Way, so the Andromeda has to do. And it's a typical medium-sized galaxy, and it has 100 billion stars. So our sun is one of 100 billion other stars. And then, of course, we have the Hubble images of the whole universe and the whole observable universe with hundreds of billions of galaxies, each one of them with hundreds of billions of stars. So in the beginning of the scientific story, we have what's called the Big Bang. A recent understanding, it certainly wasn't anything I learned until recently, is that regular matter, the matter that we learned about in whatever science courses we took, the atoms, right, the stuff, that matter is in fact only about 4% of the total stuff in the universe. Big shocker. Almost all the stuff in the universe is either stuff called dark matter or stuff called dark energy, and there are gazillions of really smart physicists trying to figure out what this stuff is, but thus far it's all speculation. But what is clear is that 13.8 billion years ago, all of the matter and all of the energy, whether regular matter, dark energy, matter energy, all of it was concentrated in what's called a singularity, where, just to give you a way of thinking about it, it was the size of a basketball. Some people say it was the size of a pinhead. Some people say you can't say anything about its size. But everything in this ginormous universe was concentrated in something that was so unbelievably hot and so unbelievably dense that, we just can't talk about it. But we do know that this all let forth in what we call the Big Bang. And the universe has been exploding ever since, and we see in the cosmic microwave background evidence that this really did happen. So now we get to theology again. What happened before the Big Bang? Why was there a Big Bang? Why is there anything at all rather than nothing? And these are questions that different faith traditions have answers to, even though their answers were formulated long before humans had been able to use their minds to come up with these understandings. And to me, what's much more important is, regardless of what we do with those question marks, what stories we tell about why everything is the way it is, that we are hugely united in sharing this story that has come to us. So here's the history of nature written out, blah, 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 evolution of the universe, evolution of the solar system, evolution of life on Earth, where we have the origin of life on Earth, and then the evolution of life on Earth. Those are two independent things. And then the evolution of minds. So there is a lot of different thinking about what a mind is and whether a tree has a mind, yada, yada. I'll put my stake in the ground and say that minds have to do with having neurons, having brains, okay? And so that would have shown up about 550 million years ago when we got all those flies and worms. Those dudes all have brains, and so the common ancestor probably did too. Social minds, minds of critters that form groups, are thought to have shown up about 300 million years ago. And then we have this huge gap to hominid minds 6 million years ago, which is where we met the chimps and bonobos in our first common ancestor. And human minds maybe 160,000 years ago. So the other big message, in case you hadn't heard, is we just showed up. Loyal Rue, one of my favorite philosophers, came up with this quasi-poem. During the course of epic events, matter was distilled out of radiant energy, segregated into galaxies, collapsed into stars, fused into atoms, swirled into planets, spliced into molecules, captured into cells, mutated into species, compromised into thought, and cajoled into cultures. So this is my story, and I feel like I'm a religious person, and I have religious responses to this story, as does Pope Francis. Here is another statement from the Laudato Si that I pulled out. A loving awareness that we are not disconnected from the rest of creatures, but joined in a splendid universal communion. Religious responses that I would lift up in taking in our interconnectedness and taking in this story are, of course, awe and wonder, but also very religious emotions, spiritual emotions, if you will, like gratitude, like humility, seeing us, you are here, humility. Assent. This is how the world is. Maybe it seems weird. Maybe you want it to be some other way. But this asks for your assent. A very important religious word. Gratitude, and particularly the astonishment of being alive at all. I mean, come on. Here we are. We're all alive. What a gas. All of this has been our evolutionary relatedness, but now I turn the conference over to the real topic, which is our present-day ecological interdependence. And to me, although there are, of course, technological issues about this, there are political issues about this, to me, this is a religious issue. And some of us have actually coined the term eco-morality. That morality which in most of the texts and traditions that come to us has been framed primarily on how we treat one another. It is now, has to be how we treat the planet, which is exactly what Pope Francis is telling us. In fact, he talks about the ecological virtues, which to me is identical to eco-morality. So I very much look forward to hearing all of what you say next. Thank you.
Do we have any questions? Any questions?
Yes.
What about viruses? I mean the biological kind. What about viruses? I mean the biological kind, not the computer kind.
Yeah, so all creatures have viruses. You know, archaea have viruses, humans have viruses, bacteria have viruses. They seem to show up as little bits of things later, and there's no real evolutionary relationship to them. They derive from their hosts. So they can evolve and do evolve, but it's not part of this big story. But yeah.
Hi, thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Some ecologists and scientists are talking about a sixth extinction event that we're entering, which is largely due to human activity. I was wondering if you could speak into that in relation to, we've seen a lot of extinction that has occurred over the history of the world, but what's unique about this sixth extinction event?
Well, what's unique about it is that it's anthropogenic. Okay, so the notion is that the sixth extinction is happening because of human activity. Okay, what I suspect you got, if you got anything from my slides, is that there are still going to be bacteria around, no matter what we do to the planet. So, you know, even if we have nuclear holocaust, a lot of the bacteria will just hang out at the bottom of the sea until the radioactivity goes away, and then they'll start over. So it's And that's true, of course, of all the previous extinctions as well. It's not like life got erased. It's just that some of the dominant species, which are the ones that are most dependent on the particulars of the ecosystem and evolve very slowly because they have long lifetimes, are more likely to go extinct than the bugs.
Other questions? Dr. Mingo.
Thanks, Ursula. That was magnificent. Let me use a metaphor to ask a scientific question. So imagine you're God before singularity, and God is thinking of creating this wonderful species of ours called humanity. And this looks like a cool way, evolutionary cool way of it happening. How reliable would that system be to produce humanity? I mean, are we just a fluke, or would this great system that you've tracked for us lead to a likelihood?
Well, I have, so, full disclosure, I'm not a theist, so, but I think about people who think that way all the time. So I am therefore making a statement based on where I'm standing, which is that if God wanted to make humans, this was a very, very interesting way to go about it. Our texts have the whole job done in 6 days and a piece of cake, and you can say, well, 6 days in the mind of God is, time is different, so people do that. But, if God did this, he was pretty classy, pretty ingenious to wait for this to happen. And I think that our notion that the whole thing was to get us is something we really have to examine. God may have really been interested in beetles, right? And then the human thingies came along. So that activates for me my humility, my assent, my realization that a lot of the problems that we have on this planet are due to our sense that we're the big enchiladas. And it's hard to get away from that because we're running the place, and and we're humans, so it's very hard to not think that we're the big deal. And if we're the big deal, then we're the point of God's creation. But I think as we review what we're doing, we have to take all of those assumptions and stare at them. I like humans better than beetles. I'm as human-centric as anybody, but I think we have to pay attention to the assumptions that we bring to our conversations about this.
Sir.
Thank you very much. I was intrigued by one of the things before this, which talked of minds.
Yes.
And one of the minds, evolution of minds, social minds, hominid minds, and human minds. The way it's put, it looks as if they are all qualitatively the same. So my question is, what is human consciousness? Is it different from a tree consciousness or a chimpanzee consciousness? And if it is different, how is it part and parcel of all this work we have had?
Well, we saw differences happening we saw differences happening throughout our walk, right? So we saw wings show up, we saw, mouths show up, multicellularity, we saw, if I'd really, I could bore you to death for 20 years telling you about the different adaptations of all the critters we're looking at. But here again, you and I put minds up there, right? I didn't put wings, all right? I put minds up there because minds are particularly interesting to us. And we are the storytellers. We're the ones, making these slides. So minds are very important to us because they have so much to do with, for one thing, our ability to figure this stuff out. The neurosciences right now are booming. There is huge levels of understanding of how minds work. And the one part that nobody can agree on or even figure out about or even have a good hypothesis for is this thing we call consciousness. Okay? And to what extent is our consciousness different from a chimp's or a dog's, or, where does it go? Is a worm conscious, yada, yada. Big conferences on this. And I know Celia has thought about this. I don't know where she is, but she might say something about it. The point is that we do have a different kind of consciousness just because we have these minds that are called symbolic minds. We have language. And there's huge communication. There's communication between bacteria. Communication is everywhere. But language has these little, seemingly small, but in fact huge features that allow us to think in abstractions and to come up with words and write them down and so on. And it's the two interesting things that I'll lift up about our kinds of minds and language. One is that children, and any of you who've had children or kid sisters or whatever know this, they're all born with the capacity to learn language really fast. So these grandchildren that I have, I see them one time and they blah, 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 and the next day, hi grandma, how's it going? They are set to learn language. And that's different. I've spent a lot of time with bonobos that Sue Savage-Rombauer is trying to teach language, and it's very, very hard. They're not set up to do that. She has to use computers and rewards and all of that to get any kind of language thing going. And the other, I can't remember. I'll stop there. But language is huge. So our minds are different for that reason alone. And why that showed up, we think it's the most interesting thing on the planet, right? But, an eagle thinks that the most interesting thing on the planet is how he can see a mouse running along the field. We can't do that. So, but neuroscientists don't understand how it works yet.
Any other questions?
I think we get to go eat now. Is that right?
Some sort of a reception, I believe.
Okay.
Can we please join me in thanking Dr. Goodenough.
I'd like to invite you all now to join us next door for a light reception on your way out, and tomorrow we begin at 8:15 for a full day of presentations.
Did you learn anything?
And those of you who are parking, remember to pick up your parking card in the reception.
Thank you. That was
Thank you all.
wonderful, and I think this worked well enough for you.